Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. I'm your host, Bob Boudelier. This podcast, my website, my newsletter, and my community are focused on helping you discover the secrets of innovation in the age of AI. Since I don't rely on paid ads, I want to thank our customers who bring me onto their programs on a fractional basis for 10 to 12 weeks as a technical product accelerator, working alongside their teams to help them develop products smarter and faster without adding risk, and while bringing human-centered AI skills into their organization. You can learn more at www.innoguide.net. In this episode, number 87, we'll be sharing part 2 of Grit, The Power and Passion of Perseverance by Angela Duckworth. Highly recommend this book. It's one of my favorites. Without further ado, please enjoy this episode. Let's get started. Although many companies hire strictly for skill and cultural fit, I think Angela makes a great case for showing that while those are important, grit is also the thing that allows you to finish what you start and get things done. Let's talk about purpose. I'm going to walk you through one of the most transformative ideas in her research on grit, the concept of purpose. And let's start with a story she tells that might just break your heart. Her name was Alex Scott. When she was diagnosed with neuroblastoma at just 1 year old, nobody could have predicted what this girl would accomplish. But at 4 years old, right before she was supposed to leave the hospital, Alex turned to her mother and said something remarkable. "When I get out of the hospital, I want to have a lemonade stand." Now that might sound like a typical childhood dream, except Alex wasn't thinking about herself. She wanted to raise money to help her doctors help other kids like they helped me. Before she turned 5, she'd raised $2,000. Tragically, Alex passed away 4 years later, but not before she'd inspired a movement. To date, Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation has raised over $100 million for cancer research. Alex Scott is what I call a paragon of grit. But here's the thing, she's extraordinary. For most of us, our journey toward purpose works differently. We usually start with something we genuinely enjoy, then we practice that skill with discipline, and eventually, if we're lucky, we discover how our personal interests can benefit others. That's where purpose enters the picture. The psychologist Benjamin Bloom noticed this pattern decades ago when he studied world-class athletes, artists, mathematicians, and scientists. Regardless of their field, every single one of them went through 3 distinct phases. First, they developed an interest. Second, they engaged in deliberate practice. And third, in what Bloom called the later years, they discovered the larger meaning and purpose behind their work. Now when I talk to gritty people about their sense of purpose, something remarkable happens. They struggle to put it into words, but inevitably, their explanations circle back to other people. Sometimes they mention specific people, their children, their clients, their students. Other times, they speak more broadly about society, their field, or their country. The common thread is always the same. What they do matters because it affects people beyond themselves. I've spent years studying this, and I've come to define purpose this way. It's the intention to contribute to the well-being of others. It's not just about ambition or personal success. It's about recognizing that your efforts have meaning because they serve something larger than yourself. Here's another example. Jane Golden is an artist and activist Angela's gotten to know through her research. She started as a muralist in Los Angeles, but when she was diagnosed with lupus in her late 20s, her entire perspective shifted. She was told she didn't have long to live. When she recovered against the odds, she moved back to Philadelphia and took over a small anti-graffiti program. Over 3 decades, she's transformed it into one of the largest public art programs in the world. Even now, in her late 50s, Jane works 6 or 7 days a week from early morning till late evening, living with chronic pain. But when asked about it, she said something that struck me deeply. Feeling sorry for myself is pointless, so I find ways to get energized. Why does she keep going? Because everything I do is in a spirit of service. It's a moral imperative. Art saves lives. Then there's Antonio Galloni, a renowned wine critic who might seem to have a more self-indulgent passion. But listen to how he describes it. His mission is to help people understand their own palates. to make 1,000,000 light bulbs go off by sharing an appreciation for wine. He grew up around wine. His parents owned a food and wine shop. So the interest came first, but his passion has been amplified by his sense of purpose. He tells me, I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm not curing cancer. But in this one small way, I think I'm going to make the world better. I wake up every morning with a sense of purpose. So she wanted to understand how important purpose really is compared to other motivations. So she conducted a large study with 16,000 American adults. She asked them to rate statements about purpose, things like, what I do matters to society, and statements about pleasure, things like, for me, the good life is the pleasurable life. The results were clear and compelling. Gritty people weren't monks living lives of pure sacrifice. They cared about pleasure just as much as anyone else. But, and this is significant, grittier people were dramatically more motivated to seek meaningful, other-centered lives. The correlation was unmistakable. The grittier you are, the more your goals are connected to something beyond yourself. Now, I should acknowledge the opposite. Now let's consider the obvious. It's theoretically possible to be gritty in service of harmful goals. History gives us chilling examples. Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler were undoubtedly gritty people. They also prove that purpose itself can be corrupted, but the exceptions prove the rule. Based on research and conversations with gritty people, she believes that for most of us, the desire to connect with and help others is a tremendously powerful source of motivation. Here's something else she discovered: the difference between having a job, having a career, and having a calling. There's an old parable about 3 bricklayers. When asked what they're doing, the first says, I'm laying bricks. The second says, I'm building a church. And the third says, I'm building the house of God. The first has a job, the second has a career, and the third has a calling. Many of us would like to be like the third bricklayer, but instead identify with the first or the second. Let's talk about hope. Specifically, the kind of hope that matters most when it comes to grit. There's an old Japanese saying that she shared, fall 7, rise 8. If she ever gets a tattoo, those 4 words would be in it, because they capture something fundamental about what hope really is. Now, when most people think about hope, they imagine something passive, a wish that tomorrow will be better than today, like hoping for sunnier weather or an easier path ahead. But the hope that grit depends on is completely different. It's not about luck or the universe doing us favors. It's about the belief that our own efforts can improve our future. There's a world of difference between thinking, I have a feeling tomorrow will be better, and resolving, I'm going to make tomorrow better. Let me share a personal story of hers that illustrates this perfectly. During her first year of college, she enrolled in neurobiology, a brutal course. She came early, sat in the front row, copied every equation, did all the readings. But when that first quiz came around, she panicked. She was convinced she'd fail, and guess what? The negative talk actually made things worse. She couldn't concentrate, she ran out of time, her grade was miserable. When a teaching assistant saw her quiz score, he strongly suggested I drop the class. He even warned after the midterm exam, which she also failed, that a failing grade would permanently damage her transcript. That's when something shifted. In the hallway outside his office, instead of crying, she made a decision. She clenched her fists, marched to the registrar's office to confirm she was staying enrolled. More than that, she decided right then and there she would major in neurobiology. For the rest of the semester, she didn't just try harder, she tried differently, attended every office hour, asked for extra work, practiced the hardest problems under timed conditions, mimicking the exact pressure she'd face on the exam. She wanted to reach such a level of mastery that nothing could surprise her, and by the time the final came around, she felt like she could have written the exam herself and aced it. And her final grade in the course was a B. It was the lowest grade I'd get in 4 years, but honestly, it's the one she's most proud of. What she didn't realize at the time was that she was unknowingly creating a famous psychology experiment that would later shape her entire career. Back in 1964, 2 doctoral students named Marty Seligman and Steve Meyer were conducting groundbreaking research. They placed dogs in cages and gave them electric shocks. But one group of dogs could stop the shocks by pushing a panel with their noses, where the other group received identical shocks but had no way to control them. After this experience, all the dogs were placed in a new cage where they could easily escape the shocks by jumping over a low barrier. Nearly all the dogs who had control over the shocks learned to jump to safety, but 2/3 of the dogs who'd experienced shocks they couldn't control just laid down whimpering, waiting for the punishment to end. They'd learned to be helpless. This experiment proves something profound. It's not suffering itself that leads to hopelessness. It's suffering you believe you can't control. Years later, after becoming a grad student studying under Marty, she read about this experiment and immediately saw the parallel to her own neurobiology struggle. Those first 2 exams had been my shocks, unexpected and painful. The question was whether I'd interpret my suffering as something I could control and change, or whether I'd decide I was helpless. Over the following decades, Marty became increasingly interested in the flip side of this research. He noticed that while 2/3 of dogs gave up, about 1/3 remained resilient. Despite their trauma, they kept trying. This observation led him to develop a revolutionary concept, learned optimism. Marty discovered that optimists and pessimists encounter bad events at equal rates. Where they diverge is in their explanations. Optimists search for temporary and specific causes of their suffering, while pessimists assume permanent and pervasive causes are to blame. Here's a practical example. Imagine you can't get all the work done that others expect you to do. A pessimist might think, I screw up everything or I'm a loser. Their explanations are permanent. There's not much you can do to change them, and they're pervasive. They affect everything in your life. A pessimist turns minor complications into major catastrophes. An optimist, by contrast, might think, I mismanaged my time or I was distracted today. These explanations are temporary and specific, but they're fixable. They motivate you to start solving them right away. The research showed that optimists not only experience less depression and anxiety than pessimists, they also achieve more across virtually every life domain. Optimistic students earn higher grades and are less likely to drop out. And optimistic adults stay healthier and actually live longer. They're more satisfied in their marriages, more successful in sales, selling 20 to 40% more than pessimists, and even elite swimmers who were trained to think optimistically perform better even after being told they performed worse on a previous run. Let's move into parenting for grit. One of the questions Angela's asked quite frequently, sometimes by coaches, entrepreneurs, CEOs, but most often by parents who worry about their children not reaching their full potential. What can I do to encourage grit in the people I care for? Now, when she asks people what they think the answer is, she gets very different responses. Some believe grit is forged through adversity and hardship. Think strict parenting, high standards, tough love. Others believe the opposite, that grit flourishes when children are surrounded by unconditional love and support, free to pursue their own interests without pressure. These 2 views seem to be at opposite ends of a spectrum, and that's actually the problem. For decades, parenting experts have treated supportive parenting and demanding parenting as if they're mutually exclusive, as if you have to choose one or the other. Here's a story about someone who helped her understand this isn't true. Steve Young, the legendary quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. Steve's father, whom everyone called Grit, was tough. He had clear expectations. When Steve wanted to quit his freshman year at Brigham Young University after being relegated to the 8th-string quarterback position, his father told him plainly, you can't quit, but you can't come home because I'm not going to live with a quitter. Now that sounds harsh, but here's what Steve says about it. It was a loving act. It was tough, but it was loving. Steve understood that his father's firmness wasn't about control, it was about believing in him. Throughout childhood, Steve's parents showed up. They were present. His mother once charged onto a Pop Warner football field to protect him from an illegal tackle. His father, despite traveling constantly for his law practice, made it home almost every weekend, once even renting a car and taking 3 flights just to get back from Montana to Connecticut. But Steve's story gets more interesting when you learn that he was actually an anxious child. He had separation anxiety. He refused to go to school in 2nd grade. Rather than dismissing his fears or forcing him to toughen up, his parents listened. His mother sat in his classroom for weeks until he felt comfortable. They were attuned to his emotional needs while still maintaining their expectations. This is the key insight. You don't have to choose between warmth and structure, between support and standards. Now let's talk about someone different. Francesca Martinez, a British stand-up comedian diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Her parents, Alex and Tina, took a completely opposite approach from the Youngs. When school counselors warned her against pursuing entertainment as a career, suggesting she think about something more sensible like computers, her father simply told her, "Go and follow your dreams. If they don't work out, you can reassess." Francesca dropped out of high school at 16 to pursue comedy. She's performed for sold-out audiences worldwide, and yet her parents weren't permissive in the same way we think of that word. Alex had clear boundaries. He pushed Francesca to do her physical therapy exercises even when she hated them. They battled over it for years. But he explained his reasoning. He set limits with love. He modeled a strong work ethic. He's a writer who believes in finishing what you start. And Tina created what she called a soil that is nurturing, a home with clear principles, moral guidelines, and limits like no television. What struck me most was realizing that both the Youngs and the Martinezes did something similar despite their very different approaches. They were both demanding and supportive. Modern research confirms this matters enormously. Psychologist Larry Steinberg found that teenagers with warm, respectful, demanding parents, what researchers call authoritative, or what I prefer to call wise parenting, earned higher grades, were more self-reliant, suffered less anxiety and depression, and were less likely to engage in delinquent behavior. This pattern holds across gender, ethnicity, social class, and culture. But here's what's crucial. It's not just about being supportive and demanding. Children receive messages differently depending on context. What matters isn't what you intend to communicate, it's what your child actually hears. Do they believe you're trying to control them, or do they understand you're invested in their success? That's the real difference between wise parenting and either authoritarian harshness or permissive indulgence. One of the most powerful ways wise parents encourage grit is through modeling. Steve Young's father was himself a standout athlete. Francesca's father is a writer. When parents show passion and perseverance toward their own goals, children don't just imitate, they emulate. They want to become like their parents because they genuinely admire them. But it's not just parents who shape grit. There's an entire ecosystem of adults who can make a profound difference. Consider the story of Corey Coleman, who was born in a New Jersey correctional institution. His mother was imprisoned, his father absent, and his grandmother, while loving, was unable to provide stable guidance. By any measure, Cody should have struggled. Instead, he graduated from MIT with near-perfect grades and is heading to Stanford for his PhD. Why? Because Cody's success had been all about passion and perseverance sustained over years and years. So now let's talk about what Angela refers to as the playing fields of grit. Here she shares the moment that changed how she thinks about raising children and building resilience. One afternoon, her 4-year-old daughter, Lucy, sat at the kitchen table struggling with a box of raisins. She was hungry, but that box wasn't cooperating. After about a minute, she sighed, put it down, and wandered away. "I nearly gasped," she said. My daughter had been defeated by a box of raisins. What kind of grit would she develop from this? She rushed over and encouraged her to try again, but she refused. It was around that time Angela signed her up for ballet. Like most parents, she had a strong intuition that activities like ballet or piano, football, or any structured extracurricular pursuit would build grit. There's good reason for that intuition. These activities have two critical features you can't easily find elsewhere. First, there's a supportive yet demanding adult who isn't the parent. And second, these pursuits are designed to cultivate interest, practice, purpose, and hope. These are the playing fields of grit. So, to be honest, the research on extracurriculars isn't perfect. Can't randomly assign kids to sports or music lessons and measure the results. But the evidence is observational, of course, but it's compelling. When researchers equipped kids with beepers to report what they were doing throughout the day, something fascinating emerged. In class, kids reported feeling challenged but unmotivated. Hanging out with friends was fun but not challenging. But extracurricular activities, those were different. Whether playing sports or practicing music, kids felt both challenged and genuinely engaged. No other experience in young people's lives consistently provides this combination. Beyond immediate experience, the long-term benefits are substantial. Countless studies show that kids involved in extracurriculars earn better grades, have higher self-esteem, and stay out of trouble. Longitudinal studies following kids into adulthood show the same pattern. More participation predicts better outcomes. And here's the thing, we're not talking about kids being overextended. The average American teenager spends more than 3 hours daily on screens. there's definitely room for chess club or the school play. But here's what really matters for grit: sticking with something for years, not just months. When researchers studied high school students who continued activities into the following season, the benefits multiplied dramatically. Steve Young, the future NFL Hall of Famer, is a perfect example. After a disappointing junior year in football, he went to his high school woodshop and created the contraption, a wooden football attached to a weight machine, so he could practice his passing motion with added resistance. His passing yardage doubled the next year. That's the power of following through. Psychologist Margot Gardner conducted a particularly convincing study. She followed 11,000 American teenagers until age 26 and found something crucial. Kids who spent more than a year in extracurriculars were significantly more likely to graduate from college and volunteer in their communities as adults. They were also more likely to have jobs and earn more money, but only if they participated for 2 years rather than 1. This discovery actually echoes the research from 1978 by Warren Willingham, director of the Personal Qualities Project. ETS, which creates standardized tests like the SAT, funded Willingham's ambitious study to answer a simple question: what personal qualities predict success beyond grades and test score? His team followed several thousand students for 5 years, measuring over 100 characteristics. When all the data was in, one variable stood out dramatically: follow-through. Willingham defined follow-through as purposeful, continuous commitment to certain types of activities versus sporadic efforts in diverse areas. Students with top follow-through ratings participated in 2 different extracurricular activities for several years each, advancing significantly in both, like becoming editor of the newspaper while also achieving something notable on the track team. Those with the lowest ratings either participated in nothing or jumped from activity to activity early. The predictive power was striking. After controlling for grades and SAT scores, follow-through predicted graduating with academic honors better than any other variable. It was the single best predictor of holding leadership positions as an adult, and it predicted notable accomplishments across all domains, from arts to entrepreneurship to community service. When I discovered Willingham's work, years after starting my own grit research, she says, I couldn't sleep that night. His follow-through sounded exactly like grit. I became determined to replicate his findings with a new measure I called the Grit Grid. With support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I recruited 1,200 high school seniors and asked them to list their extracurricular activities, how long they'd participated, and what they'd accomplished. We scored the Grit Grid based on multi-year commitment and advancement. Students earned points for activities lasting 2 or more years, additional points for demonstrating advancement, and bonus points for high achievement. As expected, students with higher Grit Grid scores rated themselves as grittier, and their teachers agreed. But here's where it got really important. 2 years after graduating high school, 69% of students who scored 6 out of 6 on the Grit Grid were still in college. Only 16% of those scoring 0 were still on track for their degrees. Similar results were seen in a separate study of novice teachers. Those who demonstrated follow-through in college extracurriculars were more likely to stay in teaching, and furthermore were more effective in producing academic gains in their students. In contrast, persistence and effectiveness in teaching had absolutely no measurable relationship with teachers' SAT scores, their college GPAs, or interview ratings of their leadership potential. Let's move on to the culture of grit. This is something Angela believes is fundamental to understanding how grit actually develops in people's lives. First football game she ever watched from beginning to the end was the Super Bowl back in February 2014. The Seattle Seahawks demolished the Denver Broncos 43-8. The day after their victory, their head coach, Pete Carroll, was asked a fascinating question about what the Seahawks organization actually looks for in their players. Pete's answer stayed with her. He talked about seeking great competitors, people with grit, people with the mindset that they're always going to succeed, that they've got something to prove, people who are resilient, who won't let setbacks hold them back. He called that the attitude of grit. What's interesting is that 9 months before the Super Bowl victory, Pete had actually called her. He watched a TED Talk that she'd given on grit, and he wanted to talk more about it. In fact, he was a bit annoyed with something she'd said, specifically that science at that point, had disappointingly little to say about building grit. Pete practically jumped out of his chair when he heard that because he knew from experience that building grit is exactly what his organization does. When we talked that day, Pete told me something I'd never forgotten. All we do is help people be great competitors. We teach them how to persevere. We unleash their passion. That conversation changed the trajectory of her research because it made her realize something crucial. Culture, the invisible psychological boundaries that separate one group from another, defined by shared norms and values, powerfully shapes just about every aspect about who we become. Think about what makes someone a Seahawk or a member of the KIPP charter schools or a West Point cadet. It's not just that they're a football player or a student or a military trainee. It's that they belong to something bigger. When you're a Seahawk, you're not sort of a Seahawk. You either are or you aren't. You make a categorical allegiance to that group. And once you do that, that culture becomes part of you. She learned this firsthand when she reconnected with Dan Chambliss, the sociologist who spent years studying elite swimmers. When she asked him if he still believed that excellence comes from countless mundane doable acts rather than innate talent, he said yes to everything from his original research. But then he added something crucial that he'd left out before. The real way to become a great swimmer is to join a great team. Now, you might think that great swimmers join great teams, but Dan was getting at something more profound. He'd observed that the arrow of causality actually goes both ways. When new swimmers join elite teams, they quickly conform to the team's norms and standards, and over time, the characteristics selected for in these high-performing cultures actually get enhanced by them. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. Dan explained it beautifully. When you go to a place where basically everybody you know is getting up at 4 a.m. to go to practice, that's just what you do. It's no big deal. It becomes a habit. What Dan was really describing is the power of conformity, the basic human drive to fit in, but also something even more powerful, the way culture can shape identity. Here's what excites her the most about culture's influence on grit. Over time, under the right circumstances, the norms and values of the groups we belong to become our own. We internalize them. We carry them with us. And here's the critical part. The way we do things around here eventually becomes the way I do things. Our identity becomes inseparable from the culture we're part of. Here's a powerful example. She received a message from a man named Tom Dierlin, who introduced himself as a West Pointer, airborne ranger, and 2-time CEO. But the descriptor he highlighted was one of grit. On active duty in Baghdad during the summer of 2006, Tom was shot by a sniper. The bullet shattered his pelvis and sacrum. Doctors told him he might never walk again. Tom's response, "You don't know me." And then he promised himself he would run the Army 10-miler, a race he'd been training for long before he was shot. What followed was 7 months of grueling physical therapy. Tom worked fiercely, doing all his assigned exercises and more. After a particularly tough workout, he experienced what he called zingers, sharp bolts of pain shooting down his legs that would make him jump with shock. But every single day, he set a goal. Slowly, he progressed. He went from barely walking with a walker to walking with a cane to walking on his own. He ran on a treadmill for seconds, then a minute, then longer. And when his physical therapist told him he was done, that he'd achieved the necessary rehabilitation, Tom said, "No, I'm still coming." He continued for 8 months more, beyond any noticeable improvement, using the equipment on his own time, even though he wasn't officially a patient anymore. When the Army 10-miler came around, his goal had changed. Before getting shot, he'd aimed to run 7-minute miles, completing the race in 70 minutes or less. After getting shot, he revised his goal. He hoped to run 12-minute miles and to finish in 2 hours. His finish time, 1 hour and 56 minutes. That's grit. So to wrap this up, Angela shared what she's learned about the powerful force that shapes how we achieve our potential in life. The core message of the book is simple. What we accomplish depends far less on talent and far more on our passion and perseverance for long-term goals. Get distracted by talent, but grit is what really matters. So how do you develop it? There are actually 2 paths. First, you can grow your grit from the inside out by cultivating your interests, practicing challenging skills daily, connecting your work to something bigger than yourself, and learning to maintain hope when things get tough. But you can also grow grit from the outside in, through the support of parents, coaches, teachers, mentors, and friends. Other people are critical to developing your grit. Then she addresses something many of us wonder often. If I become grittier and more successful, will I be happy? She surveyed 2,000 Americans and found something reassuring. The grittier people are, the more they enjoy positive emotions like excitement, and the less they experience negative emotions. Grit and well-being go hand in hand. That said, she wonders about the people close to gritty individuals. Her own daughters have watched her work obsessively on research and deliberate practice. They've seen her cry when things got tough. Honestly, they wished she'd talk less about her work and more about Taylor Swift. But here's what matters. They don't wish she was anything other than gritty. They see the fulfillment that comes from pursuing something meaningful and doing it well, and that's what they want for themselves. So here's an important question she can't yet answer. Can you have too much grit? The ancient philosopher Aristotle suggested that too much of any good thing becomes bad. Some modern psychologists agree. But here's what she found. She hasn't detected that tipping point with grit yet. And honestly, when she asks people if they wish they were less gritty, virtually nobody does. That said, there are real trade-offs. Giving up on piano and French to pursue more fulfilling goals, that was absolutely the right call for her. Sometimes quitting is the wise choice, but in those cases, you're letting go of lower-level goals while still holding fast to your ultimate purpose. To be clear about something else, grit isn't everything. She wanted her daughters to develop goodness alongside grit. Morality actually trumps grit in how people judge character. Character is plural, not singular. She identified 3 clusters: interpersonal character, which includes grit; interpersonal character, which includes gratitude and social intelligence; and intellectual character that includes curiosity. Each predicts different outcomes. Grit predicts academic achievement, but interpersonal character predicts friendships and social functioning. And here's a question she hears often. Won't emphasizing grit make kids think they can all be Einstein or Usain Bolt? The answer is simple. If your daughter says she won't practice piano because she'll never be Mozart, tell her you're not practicing to be Mozart. You're practicing to be better than you were yesterday. Most of our limits are self-imposed. To be gritty is to keep moving forward. It's holding fast to meaningful goals. It's investing in challenging practice day after day, week after week, year after year. It's falling down 7 times and rising 8. She closes with a story of Ta-Nehisi Coates. 8 years before winning a MacArthur Fellowship, he was unemployed and considering driving a cab. But he kept pushing through extraordinary stress. When he won his award, the first thing he said was, failure is probably the most important factor in all his work. Writing, he explained, is confronting your horribleness on the page, going to bed, waking up, refining it, and doing it again and again until maybe, if you're lucky, you're going to get good. Her father used to tell her, you're no genius, but if you define genius as working toward excellence ceaselessly, with every element of your being, then her dad is a genius, and so is she. And you can be too. In this last section, I just want to paraphrase some of the questions that she gets asked about grit, because I think this clarifies the concept and it's a great takeaway from her book. What about work-life balance and the cost of grit? Doesn't grit come at a cost? The honest answer is yes. She works about 70 hours a week in her lab, reading, writing, and traveling. That's time she's not spending with her husband, teenage daughters, or her best friend. It's time she's not exercising or sleeping properly. Here's what she says. Last night, dinner at my house was reheated frozen meatballs with jarred sauce. Not exactly gourmet. But here's what I want you to understand. That's my choice. I don't expect everyone to work 70 hours a week. What I do suggest is this. Write down your ultimate concern in 10 words or less. Mine is, use psychological science to help children thrive. This clarity matters because research shows that when people have a clear sense of who they are and what they care about, that clarity actually helps them accomplish more with their time. As Will Smith once said, harmony is aerodynamic. Another question, what about when passion turns to burnout? So what happens when you've lost your grit? This question breaks her heart a little because she knows burnout's real. Her cousin Tom, who's a physician and researcher, says there's an epidemic of burnout in healthcare, and he's right, and the science backs him up. Burnout isn't just exhaustion. It's a combination of exhaustion and depersonalization, feeling disconnected from the people you're serving, and helplessness. It's that voice in your head saying, I'm trying my best, but nothing I do makes a difference. Here's what she learned through recent research with her colleague Lauren Eskers-Winkler. Helping others stay gritty actually renews your own grit. Why? Because when we advise someone else, we focus on what can be changed. We concentrate on controlling the controllables. And maybe most importantly, giving counsel reminds us that what we do actually matters. What about grit and socioeconomic opportunity? Is it easier to grow up gritty in poverty or privilege? She's met remarkable people like Kayvon Asamani and Cody Coleman, who developed tremendous passion and perseverance despite difficult circumstances. But trauma is not the royal road to grit. A recent study of professional athletes tested whether talent needs trauma to bloom. Researchers compared super champions with lower achievers and found no evidence that major trauma was necessary for success. In fact, they found more trauma among lower achievers. On the other end of the spectrum, overly permissive parent, being supportive but not demanding, actually undermines grit development. Research shows that super champion athletes tend to have parents who are supportive but not intrusive. Their parents didn't push or drive them. In contrast, the athletes who didn't reach the highest levels often had parents who were overly involved and demanding in unhelpful ways. All children need the same thing, appropriately demanding challenges combined with consistently warm, respectful support. Some kids in poverty get too much challenge, not enough support. But many kids with permissive parents get lots of I love you without enough I know you can do better. How about grit in romantic relationships? Does grit matter in love? She broke up with a dozen boyfriends before meeting her husband, Jason. She's glad she did because she can't imagine life with anyone else. So, no, grit doesn't mean staying in relationships where you don't share values or life goals, but romantic relationships at work. There are days when you can't stand your partner. There are weaknesses you both must work on. And research suggests that people with higher conscientiousness, that gritty quality, have longer lasting marriages. My own research found that less gritty men are more likely to be divorced or separated. Interestingly, this pattern doesn't hold for women. I still don't understand why, but Pamela Druckerman said something that resonates with me. Soulmate isn't a pre-existing condition. It's an earned title. They're made over time. How about grit in our age of distraction? We live in an especially distracting age. Our kids face unprecedented competition for their attention from cell phones, social media, and the apps designed to be addictive. A mathematician once told her he spent hours as a boy staring at wood beams in his bedroom just thinking. His daughter, he worried, would never experience boredom. Research by Tom Wilson found something striking. Young adults found a quiet room so uncomfortable that many voluntarily shock themselves rather than sit alone with their thoughts. That's how powerful our need for distraction has become. In her home, she has strict rules. Cell phones stay in the kitchen until homework, chores, and practice are done. No phones at meals, and enforcement is imperfect, but they've discussed it as a family, why they're necessary. So that's the end of part 2 of Grit, The Power and Passion of Perseverance by Angela Duckworth, a book I highly recommend. If there were just half a dozen takeaways, I would say they are these. 1, talent doesn't predict who wins. West Point proved it, top candidates quit, and grit predicted who stayed. 2, effort counts twice. Effort builds skills, and effort turns skills into results. 3, consistency beats intensity. Sprinting is not grit. Staying in the game is what proves grit. 4, passion is not hype, it's endurance. Not falling in love, but staying in love. That's grit. 5, deliberate practice beats repetition. Not doing more, doing better, and repeating it. And 6, grit is learnable. That changes everything. This isn't fixed, it's built. I hope that's been helpful, and I hope you remember that our website is www.innoguide.net, where we have many resources for innovators, those who want to get timelines slip under control in their medical product development process. use AI in the process, and want to learn how to use automations to help as well. And if you want to build medical products that will support embedded AI now or in the future, we can help. Just know you'll be learning it from someone who's worked in medtech for 30 years and has led teams who developed and delivered 66 medical products. I want to thank Steve McIntyre for producing this, and I truly want to thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. That's a wrap.